Welcome back. As always, it is your host, your friend, your boy, your pal, your mate, your confidant, your partner in crime. Man, this list is getting long. Arachnid Soul, coming to you today with something a little bit different. I'm going to try to keep this semi-short and semi-sweet like chocolate, but I don't know if we're going to be able to pull that off. We're talking about the greatest pro wrestler, in my opinion, of the last 50 years today. But before we do that, please do me a favor, smash that thumbs up. I would highly appreciate your admiration and that like. And also, while you're there, the sub button's not too far away. Please subscribe to the channel. I like to think we do some special stuff over here. I call it panache. Bret Hitman Hart. A man who I wasn't too familiar with. I played with him in the Royal Rumble video game. I played with him in the WWF Monday Night Raw video game. I think I played that game by that point on SNES. But it was the Hitman and Shawn Michaels going into WrestleMania 12. And I remember being a little kid. I remember sitting there. I remember watching the commercial and saying, that looks like the damnedest thing I have ever seen. They will go the hour. Bret and Shawn for 1 hour. And Bret's my boy. And Shawn had been a guy that, for whatever reason from the video game, the Royal Rumble game, I disliked. Me and my friends used to always make fun of him and Nature Boy Ric Flair when they got into the Royal Rumbles on that video game. So I asked my dad, can I order WrestleMania 12 so I can see this Iron Man match? Bret's putting his World Wrestling Federation Championship, the heavyweight belt, on the line against Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels had a boyhood dream that nobody really cared about, but it was going to be one hell of a match. And my dad said, yeah, you can order this pay-per-view. So my entire family had to go out that night, and I decided I was going to stay home, and my job was to record this pay-per-view on a VHS, cassette tape, whatever you want to call it, in the VCR. And I did. This pay-per-view started. It was still kind of sunny out because I was on the West Coast at the time. And the sun started to set as this event was on. And we saw Piper and Goldust, and we saw Triple H and the Ultimate Warrior, and we saw Wildman Mark Marrow. And a lot of things happened on this pay-per-view, the Hollywood Backlot Brawl. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, you know. For those of you who don't, it's not that important, no reason to really look it up. But it was main event time. And it was two serious pro wrestlers, Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, two guys who, I mean, if you ask the fans and if you ask the wrestlers, name the two best pro wrestlers of the past 50 years, somebody's going to say Ric Flair. Somebody's going to say some wacky stuff like Hulk Hogan. But Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart's names are going to keep coming up. And I was firmly behind the Hitman. And even in the video packages, it was Bret, and you saw Bret in the dungeon, and Bret training with his father, Stu Hart, in their basement. That's what they called the dungeon, for those of you who don't know. A lot of guys came out of there. Lance Storm came out of there. Benoit came out of there. Jericho came out of there. Lots of guys that don't get credit for going through there came out of there. And you just knew Bret's family. You knew Bret's whole life. You felt like you had some perspective on who this guy was, and then they would cut to Shawn Michaels, and he's training with his trainer, Super Sock Jose Lothario, a legend from world-class championship wrestling in the early 1980s. He would have been there at the very beginning, both wrestling and doing commentary for Fritz von Erich. But there was nothing to really gravitate to with Shawn. My boyhood dream, and it's all about me. And it's just like, this pretty boy, flamboyant. They used to call him the most flamboyant wrestler in WWF, or whatever they would say about him. Just always rubbed me the wrong way. As much as I've loved Bret, I've disliked Shawn Michaels. And it was the Iron Man match, and to this day, it's maybe my favorite pro wrestling match of all time. For anybody who's not seen Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 12, I'm not going to spoil it for you. People will say, well, that movie or that song or whatever, that thing's old. You can spoil it. And to me, it's like, you know what? If it were a book that had come out 150 years ago, would you spoil the ending? Would you just assume that everybody's read that book? the answer should be no, and I assert that the answer is no. And after that match that Bret had with Shawn, Bret went away for a little while. And at that point, I started watching WWE. The Raw after WrestleMania 12 was the first time I ever watched WWF Monday Night Raw. I sat there, I was excited. It was exciting. I didn't know about any other wrestling at this point. I didn't know about WCW. ECW was a thing that I was years away from knowing about. I didn't know about All Japan Pro Wrestling or New Japan Pro Wrestling. I mean, this was really rookie mind Arachnid Soul. And I had to watch every single week because I loved it. Monday Night Raw was on. There was no SmackDown yet. It was just Monday nights. And this is when it was pure. This is when everything you knew about what was going to happen and what took place and who it took place with and anything involving WWF, you had to wait until Monday. None of your friends knew anything. You didn't go online. That wasn't really popping off yet. So you waited until Monday, and it was Stone Cold Steve Austin. It was The Undertaker. It was Mankind. It was, so many great tag teams. I remember Flash Funk coming in at some point. The first time that I got to see Too Cold Scorpio, one of the great unsung heroes and pioneers of what went on to be called the X Division in pro wrestling, this cruiserweight style that TNA and Ring of Honor really put on the map. But that's after Global put it on the map. That's after World Class Championship Wrestling. That's after Tiger Mask Satoru Sayama. That's after Tiger Mask Mitsuharu Misawa. That's after Mil Mascaras. That's after El Santo. That's after Damon Azul, Blue Damon. But I digress. And I had to sit there for about 6 months because after the Iron Man match, Bret Hart's gone for a while. He comes back, he fights Stone Cold Steve Austin at Survivor Series in an amazing match. I'm giving you homework here. Bret and Shawn WrestleMania 12, Bret and Austin, Survivor Series 96. And now things get a little bit murky. Now things get a little bit foggy because my boy's back. I'm the happiest kid in the world. I've got his trading card. I'm eating the Bret Hart ice cream bars. I'm playing with Bret on the video games. I've got the action figure. Jack's action figure, by the way, was old school. And now we get to the Royal Rumble 97. Bret gets screwed. I'm not going to go into it, but he gets screwed by Stone Cold Steve Austin. Then the month after, we go into In Your House Final Four. Bret's in the main event. To me, Bret gets screwed again. They're not showing Bret the respect that I think Bret deserves. And finally, after a couple of months, Bret snaps. And Bret started saying some stuff that turned off a lot of the American fans. Bret started talking about, because he's from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, that he might be a little bit better than some of the American fans and some of the American wrestlers. And a lot of the American fans got upset with it. I wasn't one of those people. Neither one of my parents are American. I mean, they both emigrated to this country. These are two people who became citizens. But the same stuff that I heard Bret saying was stuff that I heard them saying, talking about how there's lack of gun control in the United States. There's lack of health care. Bret was talking about the racism in the United States. He was talking about American imperialism, how the United States always thinks it's better than everyone else. And Bret went on and on and on about the wars that the United States have always had, that pitted brother against brother. I mean, what's he saying that's really that inaccurate? What's he saying that I wasn't hearing in my own house, and this was my boy Bret? So I didn't care what Bret had to say. I wasn't going to turn on my boy Bret, and never did his entire career. Whatever Bret wanted to do, wherever Bret wanted to go, I was always solidly with and behind the Hitman. And then we get to a situation where Bret's going into WrestleMania 13. He's going to take on Stone Cold Steve Austin, the I Quit match, the match that, to me, more so than even the match that Stone Cold Steve Austin had against Jake the Snake in the finals of the King of the Ring tournament, where he said Austin 3:16 says, "I just whipped your ass." The match with Bret, to me, put Austin on the map. WrestleMania 13, again, I'm giving you homework. You want to watch some great wrestling, go watch this. Don't worry what's going on Monday night this week, or Friday night, or Saturday night. You want to watch great wrestling. Arachnid Soul's trying to put you on to some secret stuff right here. Bret eventually gets screwed, and when Bret gets screwed by Vince, I'm not going to go into the whole screw job. You either know what happened or you didn't, and maybe none of us know, or all of us know, or we know parts of it, but Vince McMahon decides to screw over Bret Hart, and Bret Hart leaves to go to WCW. Bret Hart, a 5-time World Wrestling Federation champion, the excellence of execution, the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. And it's on a Monday night that we see Mean Gene Okerlund say, Bret Hart, welcome to Nitro. Welcome to Nitro. One of the craziest moments I've ever seen in my life. Bret Hart walking out on WCW television. And we can talk about Bret's career in WCW. I can mention that Bret Hart went on to become United States Heavyweight Champion. I can mention that Bret Hart went on to become a 2-time WCW World Heavyweight Champion, but we're going to skip over that, and I really want to talk about what, to me, made Bret Hart so great. And it's not just the fact that Bret was extremely solid in the ring, which is the reason that Lord Alfred Hayes gave him the moniker I used a couple of moments ago, the excellence of execution. Bret was just phenomenal at everything. You know, a lot of people talk about Bret Hart didn't really have the promo. Bret wasn't the best talker. To me, I love Bret Hart's promos. I believed in Bret Hart's promos. Bret sounded like a guy who had something to prove, who had a chip on his shoulder. Bret used to always say, I got to know who's the best. Bret was a guy that, as a little kid, you could really get behind Bret. You could really support Bret. You felt safe when the Hitman was on TV. Always had the cool gear, always had the cool entrance music, the pink and black attack. The moveset was on point. Everything looked great. Bret laid everything in, the suplexes, the punches, the headbutts. I mean, that sweet figure 4 ring post, the first time that I ever saw it. Oh my God, I'm going nuts just thinking about it. And then to me, my favorite submission hold, my favorite finishing move in wrestling, the Sator Gatami, the Sharpshooter, the Scorpion Deathlock, call it what you will. Bret called it the Sharpshooter, and I think most people still do. You have guys like Hiroshi Hase who use that move. I understand that the Luchador Conan from Lucha Libre AAA was the guy who actually showed Bret that move. I know Sting was using that move. The Sting fans out there are going to get upset with me. They're going to say Sting had that move, and I fully agree with you, and I respect Sting, and I love Sting, but this video is about Bret Hart. Bret Hart was a guy who was always going to have the best match on the card. And Bret's a guy who I'm sure if you were a pro wrestler during the tenure of Bret Hitman Hart and you showed up and you saw on the chalkboard for that night your name written next to Bret Hitman Hart's, you knew I'm going to have maybe the best match of my career, because that's what Bret was known for. When you had a match with Bret, it was going to be one of the best matches of your career, if not the best match. I mean, let's talk about Shawn Michaels' group. Let's talk about the Clique. The best match that I think I ever saw Shawn Michaels in personally, and this covers a lot of ground, would have been some of those matches he had with Bret Hart. I think the 1, 2, 3 kid, Sean Waltman, X-Pac, Six-Pac, Six, whatever you want to call him, Lightning Kid. The best match that he had in his career, in my opinion, was that match he had against Bret Hart. And I've seen him, X-Pac, fight Jerry Lynn. I've seen him fight Chris Jericho. I've seen him in great matches with other people all over the place. When we talk about Big Sexy Kevin Nash, the Giant Killer, he called himself the Silver Fox for about 2 weeks and dropped it. In any case, the best matches that he's ever had, singles-wise, in his career were against Bret Hart. This is a group that, you know, in part, about half of them really tried to bury Bret Hart. But these are guys that don't even like Bret. And Bret's going out there and Bret's tearing it up with these guys night after night, year after year, busting his ass in WWE for 13, 14, maybe 14 and a half years. And you always had that quality assurance. You always knew, whether you were with Bret or against Bret, Bret was not going to drop the ball. He took too much pride in competing in the sport of pro wrestling. There was too much legacy there with his brothers, not all, but a lot of his brothers being involved in pro wrestling. His father being a former pro wrestler. He had his sister Diana married to his brother-in-law, the British Bulldog. Just the whole family was tremendous. I need to mention Owen Hart at some point. I loved when Owen and Bret got back together. And I used to hate Owen Hart because I would see those vignettes of Owen and Bret always bickering and all the stuff that Owen had done to Bret before I started watching WWF. But when the Hart Foundation came back together and Bret brought the group together, Bulldog and Neidhart and Owen and Pillman, and they were rolling. People talk about the Horsemen, people talk about the NWO, people talk about DX. I talk about the Hart Foundation. Those were my boys. And a heartbreaking story and heartbreaking movie, I'm sure at some point, will be made about that group. But let's get back to what we're talking about. Bret Hart could go over to India, could go over to Germany, could go down as far as South Africa, up in Canada, on the house event tours, pay-per-view buys. Just Bret was the man doing the numbers. When Bret left and Shawn was the world champion, those numbers weren't that great. The people weren't feeling, I'm going to say it again, the boyhood dream. And when Shawn lost his smile, I did not shed a tear. I remember the match that I wanted to see more than anything was a rematch from WrestleMania 12 where Bret Hart was going to be able to tie Shawn Michaels up in a little knot in the center of the ring, pull back on his kneecap, that's patella for those technical folks out there, and make that Texan tap out. Unfortunately, we never got to see it, but that's another story for another day. Bret Hitman Hart, a man who wasn't used the best in WCW when he initially got there, but you can't hold somebody like that down for too long. Eventually became a world champion, eventually became the top guy in the company, and the WCW fans always respected Bret. They knew the legacy, they had watched the pay-per-views, they were wise to what was going on up there in WWE with Bret. They knew who this guy was. This wasn't some rookie wandering in on off the street. And Bret was a guy who would always give out his glasses. The dream of every Bret fan was that, you know, maybe if I go and I get a front row seat and I just kind of reach out, and maybe if I've got that Hitman shirt on, and maybe if I've got my wrist wrapped in the pink tape, maybe he'll select me. That was always the dream. I had a friend who actually did get a pair of Bret's glasses at one of the house events, and I could never negotiate with her to make a trade or to purchase these glasses. So we could go on and on about the Hitman Bret Hart. I'm going to say it one more time. To me, the greatest pro wrestler that I've ever seen active in my lifetime, and that covers a lot of ground because, you know, your boy has watched everything. I'm more educated about the different leagues and the lineage and the history and everything else. I could go on and on. I'm not even going to go back and listen to this and edit this down. We're just going to let this thing breathe. As always, it has been your host, your friend, your boy, your pal, your mate, your confidant, your partner in crime, Arachnid Soul. Easy for me to say. And I will catch you, my friends. And to be honest with you, I'm sure as soon as I stop recording this, I'm going to say, damn, I should have said 15 more things about Bret Hart. Go watch any of those Bret Hart matches. Bret Hart versus 1-2-3 Kid. Bret Hart versus Austin at WrestleMania 13. Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 12. Go watch Bret Hart versus Benoit in WCW. There's so much to watch. There's so much to view. And I will catch you again. The last time I'm going to say it. Later.